used to sleep with the window open to let the ghosts in. Fill my soul with the past, so something in my life may last. My hollow friends, they're the ones that haunt me. They will ride me to my grave. When I'm laying on my weeping pillow, they will close my eyes. And I'm not quite ready for the next departure. But when I am, I know who to call. For the world won't serve me no more. Memories of me will
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. So today I'm joined by Ebony Noelle Golden. Come on, Ebony. And Jonathan McCrory. My name is Camille Bacon, and I will be moderating today's panel. So we're joined today to talk about June Jordan's Skyrise for Harlem, and I'm going to begin by giving us a brief kind of orientation to what exactly that is, and then we'll begin with some questions. So Esquire magazine reached out to June Jordan in 1964 after the shooting of a 15-year-old named James Powell by the NYPD. They commissioned her to write a text about the shooting and also the uprisings that it incited all across Harlem. And instead of kind of providing a reflection or a critical evaluation of the shooting itself, as well as the conditions that led to it, she responded instead with a visionary reimagination of Harlem that was done in collaboration with Buckminster Fuller, an architecture firm. If you look at the monitors on your left and right, we'll be cycling through images of those kind of architectural plans so you can see what it is that we're talking about. The redesign included 15 apartment buildings, each 100 stories high and meant to house 500,000 people. And the plan also included a network of roads and walkways so the community and also others could traffic in, out, and around Harlem with ease. She also included a rainwater harvesting system that connected to the city's reservoir, and also space for government buildings, shops, businesses, and a cultural center that would offer practice studios for musicians, concert halls, space for other cultural symposia, and other modes of kind of intellectual exchange for the community. So ultimately, Skyrise for Harlem really reimagined a built environment that supported the cultivation and support of completely fulfilled lives, specifically for Black residents in Harlem. Unfortunately, the editors of Esquire magazine changed the title from Skyrise for Harlem to Instant Slum Clearance without June Jordan's approval. They also removed her name from the blueprints that she not only was an active thought partner in creating, but also began and kind of invited Buckminster Fuller to be part of that collaboration. So with all of that in mind, and that being said, June Jordan won a prize in environmental design from the American Academy of Rome in 1970. So despite all of that, she still found a way to be credited for her work, which I find to be incredible. And so this historical example not only gives us a view into the relentless efforts to curtail Black feminist imagination and eco-womanist imagination, but also serves as an example of what it means to enact with greater relentlessness a desire for more viable lived realities for Black people in particular. And it's in that spirit today that we here on this panel seek to do right by June Jordan's life-extending imagination and to consider what we may learn from these plans as we continue to cast abundant wishes for Black culture, for Black lives, and for the Black future. So that's what we're talking about today. So my first question is for you, Ebony. And I would love to talk specifically about June Jordan's sensitivity to imagining a built environment that included the kind of functional and utilitarian need for shelter and physical safety, but also thinking about the fact that she insisted that every window would have a view, and also thinking about her intention around making sure that there was a rainwater harvesting system, for example. So she's, again, not only thinking about housing as a utilitarian function, but again, the built environment as something that can support the cultivation of a life that allows you to have intimacy with yourself, with your own dreams, with one another, and also the earth. So I wonder if you could kind of orient us to what an eco-womanist lens means for you, just so we're all kind of moving with the same vocabulary.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Abisola, may I have permission to speak?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. So an eco-womanist framework, okay, this could be a whole dissertation in and of itself, and it is the subject of many dissertations, but I'll just give you some bullet points very quickly here. Womanism really considers the universal whole for a community, for Black liberation, for Black sustainability, for Black thrivability. And an eco-womanist framework in particular takes the social, political, economic, environmental, educational, health and wellness, all of those aspects into account. We say that when the people are well, we know that because the earth is well, and the way we engage in relationship with the earth reflects our capacity to be well and our practice of being well. We also understand through an eco-womanist lens what's kind of off about the world, politics, environment, education, economics, through what nature is teaching us, if we so choose to listen. And so we are not separate from nature, just like we are not separate from the decisions we make. And in understanding that, we know that living in right relationship with the planet is a ceremony that actually sustains our longevity. And an eco-womanist framework and practice, more important for me is the practice of it, is living in right relationship with the world. And so we can look at each of these kind of thematic buckets, from what's happening with climate and environment, what's happening economically, what's happening socially, politically, how are we treating the young ones, how are we treating the elders, all of the social pieces of our communities. And that can tell us, we can take the temperature on each of those and others, right? And determine where we are as a species and where the planet is. All right, and I'll let you all do the imagining about where you think we are, but it's this holistic lens. Yeah, it's this holistic lens that has helped to actually ground me in an understanding of what it actually means to be free, what liberation in practice looks like, and how do we sustain that with all of the pressures that come to and through being humans on this planet. Yeah.
I wonder, first of all, thank you, a word. Yeah. I wonder if you could speak to how Skyrise for Harlem attends to the kind of thematic buckets that you've just laid out for us so beautifully.
Okay, I'm going to also try to do this in a succinct way. So I do not have to be succinct, okay. So here's what I'll say. There are a couple of ways that we can contextualize how June Jordan gets to this Skyrise concept. One thing that I think would be helpful for us as a community is to think about 1960s Harlem, and to kind of scope out and think about 1960s in the United States, 1960s globally, right? But let's just stay home in Harlem for a second. And what is going on in Harlem in the 1960s? Does anybody know? Can somebody just lift your voice and share some responses? Okay, poverty, drugs, 1960s Harlem. What else do we know? Black arts movement, yep. Anybody else?
Black Power movement.
Black Power movement, yes. Anything else? Okay, so yes to all of those things, of course. And June Jordan is living in Harlem during this time. So all of the cultural thriving that's happening, and all of the social and political issues that are going on in the 60s, civil rights movement, people going off to war, all of that kind of stuff is happening. And June Jordan is a poet for the people. Right? And so she is writing poems about human rights. She's writing poems about being a queer Black mother. She's writing poems about what it means to be an educator. She's writing about what she can see, the view out of her window. And with that, you know, she is both, through her poetic sensibility, is both imagining a world that we should be living in while responding to the world that is outside of her window. Which is what poets do, right? Knitting words together isn't just about the words, it's about conjuring a new possibility. And the poets that really resonate for me are able to do that. And June Jordan is one of those people. To be a prophet through the poetry is what June Jordan offers with Skyrise, right? And so the ability to see, sense, and feel what is happening in your community and respond to it in a transformative way through a medium, through an ancient medium, is what she's doing. Is what she's doing. And now I forget the question that you asked. So this is why I can't ramble, but the reality is
translating
yes.
the aesthetics of the woman, like what you just defined,
right,
into the architectural design of what June Jordan has actually created.
And that's really, I mean, it still tracks then, because what she is doing is saying, I'm a part of a community that needs change. And how do you build change from imagination, ideation to impact? And so the poetic sensibility can actually go anywhere. It's not just about the poem, it's about shifting the reality and the consciousness of the people who engage with poetics. And so what June Jordan offers us is a way to see poetry as a lived experience. So a skyrise, the idea that folks who might be relegated to certain ways of being socially that might seem low, right? To reimagine what it means to elevate. And it's not just about the, moving up on up to the east side, right? But it's about a consciousness evolution. It's about the ability to be more in collaboration with your surroundings, built and imagined and metaphysical and spiritual and all of it, right? And to be able to do that, that's the elevation, that's the evolution. And so the idea, I believe, like, again, from an eco-womanist standpoint, is how do we harmonize the ego of politics, economics, capitalism, and make it such that we can all live in the world with dignity. And that's an eco-womanist practice as well. It's Sunday.
It's Sunday.
I might be preaching a little bit. It is Sunday. But I'm glad to be, preaching the gospel of June Jordan. It feels good on my heart. And it's interesting because Camille is wearing a t-shirt from the El Dorado Ballroom. I'm from Houston. El Dorado Ballroom is a historic space in Houston that has been reimagined. It's in 3rd Ward, and that has been reimagined by Salon and a lot of folks who are doing work to help us remember our, radical and social spaces in Houston and make those be relevant to the rest of the world. So there was just a series, a music festival called the El Dorado at BAM that's named after this historic space in Houston, curated by Solange. So I'll just lift that up, yeah.
So you mentioned, of course, that June Jordan is a poet, and one of my favorite kind of quotes from her, she talks about how the task of a poet of color, of a Black poet, as a people hated and despised, is to rally the spirit of your folks. I have to get myself together and figure out an angle, a perspective that is an offering that other folks can use to pick themselves up, to rally and to continue, or even better, to jump higher, to reach more extensively in solidarity with even more varieties of people, to accomplish something. I feel that it's a spirit task. And I wonder how, with all of that in mind, if we can think about architecture and the built environment when imagined through this eco-womanist lens as a mode of advocacy, as a mode of the spirit task that June Jordan is speaking about. And this is a question for both of you.
I mean, what's actually just want to say, it's a blessing to be on the stage with the two of you in such an auspicious way. Also, just to frame it that, I just take a quick moment of gratitude of just sitting back and thinking about the architects of our culture and thinking about how an architect of our culture, their birthday's today, Dr. Teer, and thinking about an architect of our culture, June Jordan, and how we get to celebrate these twins who were sometimes forgotten but had so much dexterity to their personhood that allowed for 3 people to sit on a panel to have a discussion about liberation. When I think about architecture as a built space, and I think about June Jordan's work, and I also think about what MBT is doing, also as a lived practice, and what Dr. Barbara Ann Teer did in Buying a City Block, and as a real actualized practice of land ownership, and what does it mean to create land ownership as a part of the revolutionary task that we as descendants of so much wisdom get to till the ground with, right? What does it mean for a black woman from East St. Louis to actually actualize elements of June Jordan's design, right? What does it mean to actualize it? I think there's a powerful thing that's needed, which is theory. And into which seeing theory drawn out, which is what June Jordan does. And then there's another task of actualizing it. And the weight and the toll it means to actualize that theory. And what does it mean to actually put the mechanism of putting the proof to the theory? And when I think about MBT and I think about this critical moment that Sade, as the CEO of National Black Theater, and myself and our board and our whole staff get to do in this current moment right now, I think of how we're giving proof to the theory. I think about how there's still more work that has to be done to get to the actual truth of the equation, right? That to get 1 + 1 to = 2 is not as easy as it looks like on paper. That there is mechanisms of deep seated cycle barriers that live inside of the Western culture that define what black ceilings can look like and define what black possibilities can look like, that limit the scale and the scope of how abundantly powerful we actually are and should be able to roam on this planet and do what we want to make sure that we're in connection with Mother Earth. And how that erodes at us on a day-to-day basis. When I think about June Jordan's work and I think about the theory of what she was going through, it leans me into Dr. Teer's Teer Technology of Soul, where she was asking us to decrud ourselves. What does the decrudding of who we are actually look like? What does that technology look like as a built practice, but as a theoretical practice, but also as a as a creative practice? And I'm also I sit back and just really do think about something that Sade actually gave me when we were first doing this work together, about talking about how artists how the power of art changing the hearts and minds of folks can change policy, can change the directions of how we move. And I'll pause and just say that, like, how do we create more space for our June Jordans, our Dr. Teers, to actually be able to have rooted seats of power? And rooted seats of architectural power, of not just building spaces, but building the fabric that allows us all to actually live and breathe. I think we would breathe better under those ecosystems. And in what ways are we robbing ourselves of those ecosystems? I would ask us as an audience, and I ask myself as a human being. And in what ways are we advancing those ecosystems to allow those voices, those hidden figures, for their labor not to be forgotten, but to be advanced by our existence of breathing.
Yes.
Where would you like for me to pick up with that? Okay, I'll just go. Got it. So a couple of things that I'll lift up here to align with what my dear sibling Jonathan is saying is that, so a couple of things that June Jordan does in building a queer, eco-feminist, eco-womanist architectural practice. She goes to visit Fannie Lou Hamer. And, right? Okay, so that resonates. And her conversations, and I'm learning about Fannie Lou Hamer and June Jordan's relationship through the work of Dr. J.T. Rohn, who is a scholar, activist, artist, and a dear, dear friend of mine who's helping me to understand Black radical spaces, space making. And so she goes to visit Fannie Lou Hamer, who is building campaigns, organizing, leading, and also farming. And the conversations that they're having about their economic and environmental reality allow for a few things to happen, right? And so one of the things I feel, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it'll come to pass, where this idea of where the environment, the natural world needs to be, and how can you approximate that as close as possible in Harlem, right? Like, how close can we get to the water? How close can we get to the land and make it useful and accessible for the people? I am certain that this is a conversation that they talked about on the front porch, or in, while in the field gardening, or, at the kitchen table. How close can we be to the water that we need to be in relationship to? And I think that helps me to kind of understand and contextualize what June Jordan is doing as a spirit task, because water is spirit. And to be able to get more intimacy involved in building an environment that allows you to be in right relationship with the water shifts some things about how you think about what a built environment should be. Yeah. And so that's the thing that really sticks out to me, is in relationship to, like, how do we remove the consciousness barriers when we can't really get access to the water in the way that we need to? How do we remove the consciousness barriers when there is such a divide between where we are and how we grow food? How do we remove the consciousness barriers when the idea of, what your living situation should be is predicated on somebody else's viewing of you and what you should have, as opposed to what we decide we want to have? And so there is something about building a world, and I love talking about worlding, in a way that is in right relationship to the planet, because it allows for a remapping of internalized oppression, a decrudding, an uprooting of internalized oppression. When we get to sit around and determine what a neighborhood should look like, what a living space should look like, then we get to do that from the most liberated of our sensibilities. And I think that's what makes the spirit work. It's not it's not what I want. It's not what you want. It's what is for the greatest good for 7, 10, 15 generations. Yeah. And that means we must be thinking about the land and the water and the air. We must be thinking about those things, because if we choose to design something that does not really situate that kind of longevity, then that's basically, we've made that decision. We've made that decision. And I think what June Jordan provides us is also, none of us are left out of the process. We are all responsible for building our world. And I think that's something that June Jordan offers us as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Another June Jordan quote about this specifically is, she said, "We conceived of this environmental redesign as a form of federal reparations to the ravaged people of Harlem." When we spoke, Ebony, you were talking about the notion of climate reparations. And with that, I wonder how we can imagine architecture, the built environment, when imbued again with this eco-womanist framework and sensibility, as a kind of climate reparations.
Yeah, I'm working on this. I'm working on an article for the National Directors and Ensemble Creators Institute on eco-womanism and ritual performance. And the way that I've been thinking about this recently is through the blues. And it's something that lots of scholars talk about, is how the blues, if you really study it, is a genre about intimacy with nature and all of the other pieces that come to pass through what happens in an environment, right? And I've been thinking a lot about that and preparing for this question, but also just in my own upbringing and my own work, about being somewhere between the blues and the bayou, because I'm from a bayou city. Houston is a city of many, many bayous. People jump in them and go get crawfish and out. It's a part of the veins of our city. And so, like, how is that? And when I was just in New Orleans, and somebody jumped into the Mississippi, that you shouldn't do that, right? Jumped into the Mississippi and told the person that they were standing next to, "This is prayer." Jumped in and started swimming across the Mississippi River. All right. So, what's my question again? This is why I have my notes up here, but.
Climate reparations.
Climate reparations, honey. Thank you. And so, it's, again, I think it goes back to these previous questions about what do we need to be whole and what do we need to be well. And I find the most longevity out of this conversation about reparations when we talk about the earth first. Often the conversation about reparations is through an economic lens, and that is important, and give the land back, liberate the money, all of that, right? And if we don't consider ourselves in a new economic model, in a new model that allows us to have the land to do with it what it's supposed to do, then we are actually in the same position. And so climate reparations through the Red, Black, and Green New Deal and through a lot of other policy making spaces and organizations is really about, again, another holistic practice. The money, the land, the water, repair of the heart, of the emotions, telling the truth about the legacy of how all of this wealth was created, all of that. And I think, on a very neighborhood basis, when I look out my window, I look across the street to a housing project, and I wonder, instead of me asking that question, what their thoughts about reparations, climate and otherwise, would look like. Mm-hmm. And the work that I'm doing right now is about that deep meditation. It's about getting out of the neighborhood quite often and asking people, I was just in Africatown in Alabama, how did y'all keep this? I just worked with Weeksville in Brooklyn. How did this work? How did you do all of this? And how does the residue of that impact people today? And I think that is what's more spaciousness is made available to us when we ask those questions through a climate reparations lens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think, Jonathan, that Dr. Teer's gesture of buying an entire city block, can we also think about that as a kind of climate reparations or architectural reparations?
I definitely think so in so many different ways. I think in the ability to, because I think what a lot of people don't also understand is that what Dr. Teer was also leaning into was the river that is on 125th. Because underneath 125th is a river that is active, that actually disrupts a lot of construction. It has high tides and low tides. It's actually an interesting barrier that made Whole Foods have a hard time actually building on 125th because the tide was disrupting their ability to build a strong foundation. And so that active river is a part of an indigenous technology. Mm-hmm. It was a river that was used by Native people to basically go from what we now know as Brooklyn to what we now know as New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And so it was a thoroughfare for communication, for transportation, and for community to get to know each other. And so when Dr. Teer, who had gone to Yoruba land and loved and the Osho, but Abasola, if you could say it for me, because I'm gonna butcher it. Oshobo, thank you, Ayodele. Oshobo, in Nigeria, in Yoruba land, when she had gone there, she fell in love with that location, and a lot of Ayodele and Abisola are two of the founding members of MBT who basically have held the stewardship of this organization in our legacy space. So, gratitude and much thanks for the ways in which that you do it on a day-to-day basis. But to talking about that reparations, right? Many Black and brown bodies found themselves here not by choice. The reparations of buying that city land, that city block, 62,000 square feet of real estate, was a reclamation of saying, I can build my Nigeria, my space of reckoning, my little Africa, my space of becoming, my place for my people to know who they are, that they didn't come from slavery, but they came from kings, and like all that narrative, disrupting the narrative change, narrative shift, and create actually a temple to their own liberation. Again, creating an actualization for the theory to be made, to given a proof. And working with other spiritual technologies to unleash the soul of Black folks. So I think what is powerful about MBT, and what's powerful actually about this whole evening, if someone wants to chart it, is that it's charting through soul. It's charting to navigate through soul. And I think that when we think about someone like June Jordan, we think about someone like Dr. Barbara Ann Teer, we think about the building itself, this building of the future that you'll hear more about later from other folks. I think that we're having a conversation with a feminist theory, with women birthing society into a new space of saying, this is what wholeness can look like if you walk through my doors. Because inside our doors, she brought 7 Nigerian artists to use crafts and tools that were over 300 years old, dating far back than what this building is actually, to actually transcribe who we are onto the walls so that it radios out, right? So as we could see in the structure of June Jordan, she is taking some indigenous architectural practices and gestures and saying if we were to put that in front of us on a day-to-day basis, it would shift who we are and how we actually show up. So Dr. Teer, again, taking that theory, putting proof to it. What if I put, I think it's like 60 wooden totems in the likeness of deities, orishas, and saints of the Yoruba faith, and I transcribe that on the, I put murals on the walls. I put a fence that tells the Yoruba folklore around, so that I put a fountain, actually. If we think about this, Harlem does not have a fountain. There's nowhere in Harlem where free water is running to allow for a different kind of relationship to space to show up. And if you think about any other space in New York City, the fountain is a gathering space for healing. Healing where people are, yes, bathing themselves, but healing where people are gathering to feel the meditative practice of what water does as a flow. So what does it mean to have a building that has a free fountain that is outside of it flowing water, and where people make wishes, where children come and play, where also homeless people get to bathe? All of that is a reclamation of space, a reclamation of tool, a reclamation of need. And so what does it mean, again, when you're talking about that reclamation of what it meant to turn that city block into a space where a Black woman owned land and where a Black woman got to carve out her oasis outside of the mechanism of the Western capitalistic gaze, and asking the question, in the 50 years of, we're over a half-century-old organization, why in her lifetime, she transitioned in 2008 on an untimely heart attack, why in her lifetime wasn't abundant resources poured down on her shoulders? Her foundation was as strong as it needed to be when her wisdom was a gift that we now get to bathe in. What ways, again, go back to saying, are we creating cultural, social, economic barriers that don't allow the wisdom keepers who are radically giving us the gifts of transformation to actually live a more abundant life? And we create barriers because of who they are, because of where they come from, because their likeness doesn't look like us, right? Or look like the power struggles or power dynamics. They want to have reclamation show up in the space where they're giving resources of food instead of reparations of money. Like, what does that look like? How are we silencing it? And I think that that's something that June Jordan, this conversation actually has helped me even think about when I think about even this opportunity that I get to have every single day of opening the doors of MBT and seeing who can come in. Well, the question also I need to be asking is who doesn't feel like they're welcomed in?
Yeah.
I think it's just something really beautiful to think about NBT as a river. And I was thinking about it like NBT is an ocean or a lake, or NBT absolutely is a cosmology. But there's something about the moving water of a river. You come in, you get the medicine you need, you stay a while if you choose, or you come in and get what you need and you leave. But the idea is that the water is never the same, but it all has a source. And whatever you step into, I think there's that saying, you never step into the same river twice. So you continue to grow and shift and change institutionally by growing, but also by welcoming new voices, new perspectives, new communities,
new spaces. Like this. We're in a capital redevelopment project, which is forcing us to have a relationship with space in a different kind of way, inviting us to say, what does it mean to take a technology that's been stewarded on 125th Street and Fifth Avenue and actually say, well, actually a diamond can shine anywhere. And so what does it mean to be placemaking anywhere?
That's right. Beyond walls. But also to have that source space that you're building, and know that the technology, the cosmology, is universal. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have one more question for you, one more for both of you. Okay. I would love to talk specifically about this new building, and specifically the new NBT building.
All right.
Yes. In correspondence to Buckminster Fuller amidst their drafting process, June Jordan urged him towards the inclusion of curvilinear features on the entire design process. And she thought of corners as a psychological terminus. When we spoke,
sharp corners.
Yes, exactly. When we spoke, you talked about how the interior design of the new building was absolutely moving in that same kind of sensibility. And I wonder if we could speak specifically about that, because I think it's a perfect example of this bridging of theory to praxis that you're talking about.
And what's actually quite powerful is that when in our old building, Dr. Teer would not allow any cornered spaces to happen. So like our doorways were arches. So that she believed in the arch as a mechanism, and that the angle. So in our new building, and I just want to uplift that through the leadership of Sade Lithcott and Michael Lithcott, our board chair, and Sade, our CEO, we have a beautiful design team of all people of color who are helping to design our building. It is actually a powerful gesture of actually, again, turning theory into practice, and trying to etch away at some of that oppressive language of opportunity for those designers of color as well. And so in this building that when you go to 125th and Freedom, or if you've seen the New York Times article, it is that is your show. The 125th and Fifth Avenue. But 125th and Freedom is what we're trying to actually do. It's a show that Ebony Noelle Golden did, where the premise was, we produced it, where the theory was, if Harriet Tubman was alive today, how would she free black people? And it was a 5-hour durational piece that activated 16 sites from river to river on 125th Street, taking the performance out into the streets. It was free and open to the public. Over 3,000 people were able to be blessed and baptized by that journey. So our interiors of our building stay on mission and task. So the interiors of MBT are welcoming indigenous technology to take root and allowing for indigenous people, indigenous artisans to put their theory into the land. So instead of just having a land acknowledgement that people will say, we're actually planning to put a land acknowledgement into the ground. So that when you walk into the space, you are acknowledging indigenous folks and who came before. We are bringing the curvature into almost every element of the entire space, from the doorways, their arches inside the space. We're bringing back the Temple of Liberation to the loggias that will be inside the space, bringing the air and your ability to look in and look out into the actual physically built space. There's so many different ways. And in the actual tower itself, designed by Frida Escovedo, there are balconies so that people can actually allow themselves to have that piece in that corner of their sky and be able to see that. And see that from a different height. We are changing the topography in different ways on that corridor so people can witness river to river and be able to dream from river to river. There's an opportunity for also in thinking about this idea of this feminist thought of like, what does it mean for us to be self-sustaining in all ways? So there'll be a shop down in the basement of our theater so we can build our own sets. There will be a rehearsal hall. There will be an audio recording space so that we can record our own stuff and be able to give this also to community so they can record. In the dream space of where we're also heading and where we're going is that our Temple of Liberation, which is the crown jewel, I think, of our spaces, which is a octagon, 3,000 square foot octagon space that has a templed ceiling up to 36 feet in the air. It was originally designed to be an immersive theatrical space. And we are going to be able to fulfill that vision that Dr. Barbara Ann Teer initially had by making a hemispheric 360 reality womb that artists will be able to devise and develop their work inside of. And we're very blessed to have someone like Nona Hendricks actually be our inaugural artist to actually christen that space with her wisdom and her vision. Inside of that technology, there's also this idea of what does it mean to be a cultural hub, a beacon that allows not just an institution to thrive, but for generations to thrive. So what does it mean to create an artist housing program inside of our building that actually will take 10 apartments from the 250 and launch hopefully a beautiful beginning step of the city recognizing artists as a fundamentally important individual and person who actually needs housing justice in this economy and in this climate. So what would it mean for us to imagine into, and we're trying to make it happen, a 5-year program where an artist gets to live fully subsidized with their rent going towards actually buying a brand new home, a brand new condo. What would that look like? Who gets to imagine differently with ownership, actually, right? Activating Dr. Barbara Ann Teer's philosophy of living, working, and serving in your community, not having to always travel in or feeling like you're being priced out. What would it mean? That was about that buying of that property. Do I need to wrap up? Okay. So I would just uplift and say the building of the future is hoping to hold us as humans, as a cultural humans, hoping to hold Black culture in the space of its root, in a home that it's been its mecca, so that it's not priced out of it, but it's able to find itself rooted inside of it, and thinking of innovative ways to bring our community closer to loving itself every single day. And that task is a task that is, when you hear it, the theory of it sounds so good, but the action of it is something that is a second-by-second breath work that one has to say yes to, a second-by-second breath work that someone has to decrud themselves from, because it's not something that's just given to you. You were born whole and complete, but this world sees you as different. So what does it mean for you to radically not try to change the world every single day, but change yourself to see yourself whole, so then the world changes because of your righteous stance in which you walk, breathe, and live in?
I know that I don't need to answer that question. It's been answered.
Absolutely. So one more question for y'all. In her book, In the Wake, Christina Sharp writes about the concept of aspiration. So not just aspiration as to aspire to dream, but also aspiration as in to breathe. And she talks about aspiration as a mode of putting and keeping breath in the Black body. And I think studying people like June Jordan, people like Dr. Barbara Ann Teer, is a mode of that aspiration, is a mode of putting breath back in the Black body and keeping it there. And I wonder if you could speak to, in your own work, in your own lives, how embodying these eco-womanist frameworks is indeed a mode of aspiration for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's what I can offer. Through this lens, through this framework, my life has shifted. I would not have called myself a climate justice person. I wouldn't have said that about myself, even though I've been doing work that's at the intersection of housing justice, reproductive justice, education, all of the things. But I didn't identify with the movement and with the practices in the same way. I just didn't. And through this lens and this framework, I've been able to, something has been harmonized in my practice that allows me to invite more spaciousness, more care, more transparency, and more boldness, to be quite honest, because I am absolutely not just doing an art project. I'm grateful to do art projects, but this idea of what do we have more of? What do we have more of? Because this work is happening, stewarding resources and teams of people is a large responsibility. And it has to be more than art informed, and the result is the art. And so that's a breathing. Yeah. Is to say, through a practice, through making the art, through having the conversations, through the investment, I can be more authentically myself and do the work that I've been put here to do. I'm breathing. And when folks come into the process of working on the current work that I'm making, which is in the name of the Mother Tree, is, that work is all about how trees collaborate with each other as opposed to compete, right, for the whole community to thrive. Well, this community doesn't remember that power, and all hell breaks loose. And then it's through ritual and through ceremony that they remember how to breathe. They remember where to go, what rivers, from institutional rivers to spiritual rivers, to go back to in order to breathe. And I'm finding that in myself as I am stewarding this space of possibility for creatives. Like, I'm finding, that I have to go to places like Africa Town. I have to go out to Algiers. I gotta go and touch this one tree that this one person said to go and touch in South Carolina on Gullah Geechee land. I must, in order to be authentically holding space for other people to breathe, culturally breathe, artistically breathe, creatively breathe, spiritually breathe, and literally breathe. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
In my response to that beautiful question, I just want to say thank you for your very careful and thoughtful moderation. I mean, it's just really deeply appreciated. I would say that the learning that I've been able to gain is to stay soft. As a person who lives in a body that is he, him, my spirit is definitely a she. And through the practice of being committed and being a servant of Dr. Teer and her vision, I've actually, and a lot of womanist visions, I've actually learned the righteousness of being soft, the power, the revolutionary power of being soft. The grace that's given in my breath and my softness, the way in which I can expand because I am soft. that my revolution is actually showing up fully and wholly as myself, but as soft as I possibly can be, so that I can teach people and teach myself that the hard edges that I find myself rubbing up against, they can't actually break me, that I am actually malleable to their ever-changing whim, and that my resilience, my spiritual breath resilience, is found in actually my obedience to that feminist thought of what would it mean to own your softness in this body? What would it mean to teach people the righteousness of softness in this body, loving them in all ways, and getting out of the way to allow something greater to use you?
Thank you both for this Sunday sermon. And with that, we will wrap. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.